On the Documentary Review Podcast, we talk about really, 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 really small houses. Welcome to the Documentary Review Podcast. I am PT.
And I'm Jonathan. Glad you can join us.
Indeed. How's it going, Jonathan?
Doing good. Beautiful weather out in Colorado, which happens to be the same state this documentary was filmed in, or most of it.
Right, indeed. I'm very interested to see what your take on this film is, because it takes place in your neck of the woods. I don't know. I just feel like you're gonna have some great opinions on this one. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't want to
All right.
overhype it, but I think you're gonna probably change people's worldviews in this podcast.
Probably, I would say after this podcast, most people who listen will build a very, very small house and move to Colorado. That's just my prediction.
Awesome. Things are good in my world. I was gonna brag about this before being on air, but I'll talk about it at air because that's just how I roll. So I'm a writer and I write um, dark fantasy and horror books, and my book Regulation 19 is currently number 3 in the dark fantasy category on Amazon and number 14 on the horror category on Amazon. So I was looking at that just like 2 slots ahead of The Shining, which is also like on sale right now, and I was like, that's awesome. And then I was like, should I really be excited about like being 2 slots ahead of like a 40-year-old book? I don't know. That book's been available for a long time. But
Well,
I'm 2 slots behind Mr. Mercedes, which is one of Stephen King's newer books too. So I feel good about it. I'm happy.
well, congratulations. That's awesome, Tyler.
Thank you.
Way to go. Way to be a successful author. Anybody out there? I've read his books, and they're amazing. You should go get them on Amazon right now.
Yeah. So
And
so
on that,
I was just gonna say if I'm a little like looser lipped than normal in this episode, I've been celebrating a little bit my sales success with a beverage or two. So
well, congratulations, and I'll try and be the taskmaster for this episode of Documentary Review Podcast, which brings us back to Tiny, a story about living small. I'll give you a little synopsis in case anyone hasn't seen it yet. It's basically the story of his name is actually Christopher Smith. He wants to build a small, and in case you don't know, a tiny house by their standards is basically anything under 200 square feet. So for people that aren't that great at math, that is homes that are, you know, roughly 15 feet by 7 feet long. They're incredibly tiny. Not just, 1,000 square foot house, which is what I kind of had in mind as tiny prior to this documentary. But anyhow, he builds his from scratch. There's kind of three themes that are covered in the documentary. One is the kind of story slash journey of Christopher building his tiny house. It also has a lot of commentary on materialism in modern America, which is obviously comes into play if you can live in a 200 square foot house, or some of these people live in a 100 square foot house. Obviously, the average American has a great deal more than that. And then the other theme that's kind of covered is what is home? What makes home? What are we looking for in life? So that's kind of the themes that are covered in the documentary. It's a short film, so if you've got an hour, you can tear right through it and take it all in.
now, let me just pause for a moment to point out the eloquence of that synopsis. You really nailed it on that one. It's our 6th episode, so I guess we should expect you to be good at this point. You're 6 in, but you exceeded my expectations on that one, bringing out the themes and everything.
Well,
Well
thank you.
played. Well done. Um, yeah. So where should we start?
Well, start in the
I'm
beginning. I'm always curious to see your take on the openings because I know that's a big thing for you.
yeah. And I'm trying to remember what the opening was of this one. I'm not prepared for this. I think it was just like shots of the open Colorado landscape,
I'll give you
maybe
a.
with with a voiceover.
Yep, starts with the voiceover. Christopher, the subject, is given a little voiceover narration about home. Uh, it's got, again, see, this is why now I was paying attention to the opening because I generally gloss over it a little more than you do, but has beautiful wide shots, and he's setting up his home eventually. His goal is to put it in Hartselle, Colorado, which, in case you don't know where that is, it's up in the mountains past Pike National Forest, kind of like southern midpoint of the state by Colorado Springs, in case you're familiar with Colorado. But anyway, way up there in the mountains. There's nothing up there. So there's these giant panoramic shots of, the Colorado landscape, plains and mountains, and then, this tiny, tiny house in there. And then while he's doing his little, narration about home.
Right. And I think right away, I'm just gonna go ahead and get out of the way my kind of like thing that I don't like about this movie, and then we can, because I feel like there's a lot of themes and stuff we can talk about, so I just want to get this out of the way right away. I don't think I like the whole. So basically, the movie is about Christopher and his girlfriend. They are the two central characters, Christopher and Marta, I think her name is. They are the central characters, but they're also the director and writer and editor of the movie, which, I don't know, something about the way it's done I didn't necessarily like that much. Like I felt like all the voiceovers were very written, you know what I mean? Like obviously all voiceovers in documentaries where it's the person who's making it is also like the main featured person are written out in advance, but I don't know, something about this felt very very written out. And yeah, I don't know, I just feel like it would have been possibly a stronger documentary were it focused on someone else building a tiny house rather than the person who was also directing the movie. So like, if I'm coming to interview you about you building a tiny house, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to, even though like we're friends for life, you trust me, all that stuff, and you're comfortable with me, I'm going to come and I'm going to bring you questions that you don't know what I'm going to ask you in advance. You're going to have more candid answers, all that stuff. And I felt like a lot of the scenes in this movie were very much like, they were like, all right, now we're going to shoot this, and then they shot that. So it was very like thought out in advance. So I guess that's kind of my nitpick of the movie, is like everything that was said in the movie was very like poised and very like properly stated. There was a little bit of I guess unreality to it, that it all felt so set up in advance that I didn't get to know necessarily, I don't think, the real Christopher and the real Marta, because every time they were on camera, they were the ones turning on the cameras, and they were probably talked about beforehand. Here's what we're going to do with the cameras. So I felt like I didn't necessarily get a super clear picture of them as they really are. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're right, but I think a lot of the reason behind that was I could be wrong, but it really seemed like, and especially because it's these essentially two young people that didn't, as far as I know, don't have any other experience in filmmaking. The documentary seems like it may have come about as almost like an afterthought or side effect of his actual home building project. Because I did notice that through the film, like a lot of it is almost like your first person or perspective, point of view shots and stuff like that, and so it's obviously just a real version of them. They're working on the house, they're doing whatever, they're it's in their bedrooms and stuff like that, and you have this kind of low grade film quality of kind of where it might have. I got the feeling that maybe they weren't trying to make a documentary from the get go. They were just trying to document this event in their lives. Because then certainly they did get the idea and went back, and I'm sure it was when you're watching the film you see cuts because they interview all these other people that own tiny houses, but you can certainly see like all the shots that were put together, my guess, after the whole project was done, and they decided to make this this documentary, are then done from a really a high quality camera. They have nice thought out shots. In fact, even though they did it, like you can tell, it had almost like a forceful student kind of a feel, where that's tiny is the theme, and the shots were beautiful, but they would be really tight, close shots of very simple objects or pieces of the house or interior shots of the homes. There was a lot of that to kind of go with that image of tiny, and not just tiny, but to find the interesting nature of very, very small things that you can, focus in and still there's a lot there, and I think that's kind of what they're pushing. The thing that I kind of did not like about the documentary was how one-sided it was, as far as anything that is crappy about a tiny house is either not mentioned or extremely glazed over. I mean, like,
Right.
like they're kind of having this debate in one scene with his family, and they're like, why wouldn't everybody have like a super tiny house? Why do people need these like big giant houses? And it, while watching, I was sitting in my big giant house thinking, well, I can answer that question really easily.
Right.
But
No, that's super valid point, and I definitely agree with that for sure. For sure, that's a problem with a lot of my, like, this is I think the first documentary we watched that's like trying to, I don't want to say push an agenda, but like has a like idea of what they want you to feel and think about it. I think, unless I'm forgetting one, but and that's really a problem with a lot of documentaries, in my opinion, and I'm sure we'll talk about more as this podcast continues. But yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. And on the whole filmmaking thing, another funny thing about it was like obviously there's a really low budget documentary, but I did see in the credits at the end that they did a Kickstarter, and you can kind of like see where the Kickstarter money went. Like there's a day when he's putting a roof on the tiny house where they clearly rented a crane that day, because there's so many crane shots in that one scene. Like there's no crane shots in the rest of the movie, but that one scene when he's putting on the roof, there's got to be like at least 15 crane shots, like just different angles. Like,
yep.
It's super crazy. They clearly like did that, and then at the end they like there's like a helicopter shot where clearly the Kickstarter money like went towards those two things, which is fine.
Right, but
it's just you could definitely see the seams of where the money went.
Yeah. But actually, the other thing I'd be really curious to know is, so this documentary came out in 2013. I would love to know what year he built his house, because everyone in the documentary refers to the recession like it's fresh in the, not just like
Right.
It seems like it's happening real time when they're talking about it, not that it's back in 2008 when when we had like the housing collapse and the recession. So, and maybe it wasn't, but it certainly seemed that way from my point of view. They just tell the months that he spent building his home, but they don't mention what year it is. And the film itself came out in 2013.
That's a good point. I had not thought of that. So let's talk a little bit about like the basic story of it. So basically, it's this guy. He's like 29 years old. And again, this is a little bit where I felt like there's a little bit of a setup maybe, but he like has zero building experience and like zero blueprints, nothing to go on, but he does like to go to tiny home blogs, and he decides he's gonna build a tiny home, and he wants to do it over the course of one summer. He's taking some time off or whatever, and he wants to build the tiny home. So we follow him throughout that process. And since he has no prior building experience, you could probably guess how well he start with.
Right. But actually, that was one thing that kind of made me laugh throughout the entire film. Was like, he says, I have no building experience, yeah. But throughout the entire film, anytime they're actually doing any building, or almost any time, literally, like one of them has like an iPhone or whatever out, and they're watching YouTube. Like
Right.
You could tell they just YouTube. How do I wire a house? Which
right.
And
like the shocking thing, not to spoil it, is that, but it turns out pretty good. It turns out pretty okay.
Yeah, in fact, it really makes me believe that like you can do a lot. You have a huge, like literally with YouTube. I mean, like those people built a house, which, like honestly, I've done a lot of construction, a lot of building and things like that. None of it's rocket science. If you take your time and like, the stuff that they didn't show, which I'm sure there was a lot of, especially, coming from zero background in construction, was them throwing stuff away and redoing it. Because we said that he's like, when he was like, I ran out of money. They were just doing the framing. The framing was still going on. I don't think the roof was on yet. So I mean, like, lumber 2x4s are really cheap. So at that point, he probably had like $1,000 invested into his tiny house. I was like, if you had $1,000 budget and you're broke now, okay, then you really didn't plan for this.
Well, at that point, I was thinking, well, maybe you shouldn't be making a documentary at the same time that you're building your house. That's probably cutting into your funds a little bit there. But yeah, yeah. So we watch him build his house. Any other observations on the whole like building process and all that stuff? You probably have more. You definitely have more building experience than I do, and probably more to say about that than I do.
Yeah, I don't want to bore everybody to death with it, but one thing, like there's like 10 times I just wanted to like reach through the screen and give that guy some speed clamps, because my God, I was like, this guy's obviously never built anything. Certainly not by himself, because I mean, like that right there would have saved the guy weeks of building time. I mean, like when you're framing or building construction by yourself, like one thing, like so there's these little clamps that you basically just like take one hand, you can like having extra hands, you can just clamp stuff together while you're holding it, putting it in position, building out. Like I would say, I mean, like obviously, like so it takes him a year to finish the project, but so spoiler alert there, but he, I know I was a little late on that, but he also takes like several months off where he's just like broke and not working on it, kind of a thing.
Right.
But I mean, like I think like someone with a decent building background, could probably pop one of those together in a month by themselves, if that was their, without a job or anything. Like they had 50 hours a week to dedicate to that tiny house. I would think that would be a reasonable amount of time to put it together. But I give them credit. Taking on a big project like that with no background in any trades is a tough thing to do.
Yeah. All right, one last nitpick. I shouldn't say last because, who knows where our conversation is going to go. It might have more.
Sure.
And really, this isn't even a nitpick. This is just an observation. The movie was definitely, like, the guy's 29 years old, but I don't know. You could definitely tell from, like, the voiceovers and stuff. It, like, seemed like it was done by, like, a guy with, like, a young perspective. You know what I mean? Like, his worldview was, like, not what probably our, like, slightly more mature, probably, worldview is. He had a very idealistic and, like, black and white kind of view of the world. That is, I guess all of us probably did at a younger age or whatever. But yeah, so that bugged me a little bit in some of the voiceovers when he was like saying the super stuff that I would have believed when I was like, in my early 20s or whatever. But yeah, that's my other nitpick, I guess.
Yeah, I'd bet dollars to donuts that those voiceovers were, like you said, obviously the voiceovers were written, and I bet you anything they were written by his girlfriend. Because she, one thing she mentioned is that she's a writer, and she has this longing for a sense of home, and very curious about what home is. And then most of the voiceovers were about, essentially that exact topic. So I'm sure a lot of them were written for him by her. Maybe I'm wrong, but and she was younger, I assume. She never mentions her age, but I got the feeling was early or 20s.
Right.
So that might be where that comes from.
I was looking at the one funny thing is I was looking at this movie on Internet Movie Database, and it had a really funny comment that said, A, is there anyone who lives in a tiny house who isn't a writer? And B, is there anyone who lives in a tiny house who doesn't have a cat? Those were like two.
That drove me crazy the whole movie. I was like, oh my God, if I lived in a house that was 100 square feet or 120 square feet, I sure as heck wouldn't have a pet or maybe a goldfish, but definitely not a cat. All those people had cats. And the other thing they did not have, zero of them had, were kids. I shouldn't say zero. There was one tiny house dweller who's kind of like led the tiny house movement, who eventually does get a family, and then he has to get, he calls it his McMansion, which is a 500 square foot house, which I thought was cute, but I mean, like, even that, like, there's where you draw the line. All these people are either single. Another observation, there's one couple that lives in one of the tiny houses, and she was the one that was, like, an investment banker and hated her job, and so she and her, I assume, husband, built this tiny house and live in it, and they're debt-free, which is cool. They had, and theirs was kind of like in an in-town environment, which I'm sure almost all of these are, just for the electric and water aspects of it, but they had no curtains on their little tiny house, which was like basically in someone's backyard. I was like, wow, there's two people There's no like other room. There's one room. It's all one room and like a little divided off bathroom. That's what this is composed of. And I was like, where are your curtains? Your neighbors must hate you. Anyway.
Interesting. I did not notice that.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. Let's talk about like the setup of the tiny house. So, like, I'm not a very like spatially oriented person. So when you say like dimensions, I have a hard time picturing it. But when I see him go and pick up a a just like truck bed, and he's like, yeah, this is what I'm gonna build my house on. That I get a pretty clear idea of how big it's gonna be. These are really, really small houses.
Yeah, like so. There was the smallest one in the film, so they give you it's cute, or they either interview or show photographs of a bunch of different people in front of their tiny houses, and they also give the square footage of the home, and the smallest of which was a woman who lived in an 84 square foot home, which is basically a room that. So I'm a little over 6 feet tall. So I could probably touch both walls in either direction, in the one room, which there's only essentially two rooms. There's that room, and then a divided off bathroom, and then a loft, which has the bed. So that's a tiny house. That's, in my opinion, about as small as you can get.
Yeah. And so, and another important thing about the tiny houses is that people often build them on wheels so that they aren't subject to like building codes and like minimum size requirements and things like that. So
right.
That's the reason a lot of people build them on trailers and stuff like that. So, I guess let me ask you, as a person who lives in a larger than tiny home, as a I mean, I would say I live in a fairly small home, but definitely compared to those people, did this movie like change anything about the way you thought, or did it make you think like, was there anything appealing about the tiny home concept to you?
Oh yeah. I mean, I certainly like the general concept of it. That you don't need a big giant house to live in, which is a little hypocritical because essentially live in a big giant house or whatever. But on the flip side, there's a line like when they're going over like all the founding tiny house people and stuff like that, and they're really kind of talking about like how can this, obviously everyone's not going to go live in a 200 square foot house, but how does this kind of how can we apply this kind of a theory or concept to everyone? And they're basically saying like the one thing they said, a tiny house is basically where all the space is used well. In my opinion, I qualify. because every room in my house is used every single day. We don't have any rooms that are just collecting dust. Granted, the rooms are somewhat bigger or whatever, but at least they're all used and utilized well, I think. So, I think if we had like, well, I guess we do have a spare bedroom that no one ever really goes into. It's essentially collects our craft supplies and decorations and whatnot. But other than that, every room in the house is used every day. So and it did the other thing that it like, I'm always working hard, and as is everybody. It's kind of like the American thing. That's why we all have giant houses, is because we all want to succeed. We all want to work hard and do better. So when you get to a point where you can afford something bigger and better, you get it, and that's a part of the American dream, hitting those goals, and then watching the tiny house thing. And I've kind of thought about this prior to the movie. This home that I live in now will be my last home, or at least barring the unforeseen. But I feel like even if I do much better financially, I'm sticking with this house because it is everything I need. It's very well used space. I don't ever feel like I'm cramped in here, but I don't think that anything else is justifiable. So that kind of reinforced my idea, and they really kind of pushed that concept. Except they would say like my house is way too big and I should probably downsize, but that's just silliness. Especially because like my wife brought up an excellent point. one thing my wife and I love to do is have people over. We entertain. We like to have parties. We like to have dinner guests. You know, that social element of life is a big thing for us. And there is no way, like, though, when people are sitting in their, it's cute, they're sitting in their bedroom / dining room / office / entertaining room. They said that in the film, and I didn't really think much of it. But you cannot fit, certainly you couldn't fit 5 people in any of those houses at the same time, or, you know, unless everyone's standing up shoulder to shoulder. So you can't have friends over. That's a pretty important thing in life, in my opinion. Something that you can no longer do in the tiny house.
Fair enough. That's a fair point for sure. A couple of points that they brought up that did kind of hit home for me was just the idea that, you know, that the home size since the 70s is like doubled or whatever, and at the same time the family size has been shrinking. So it's definitely something that made me think a little bit. And then also the idea that that I don't remember what percentage it was, but like some ridiculous percentage of pollution is caused by buildings. So that made me think a little bit. And I am attracted to the whole minimalist kind of thing. Like it is something that's attractive to me, but at the same time, I don't think I should feel like morally guilty or anything for living in a bigger house. But I think I thought it was really cool though to see the smaller houses and see the interesting ways that people were using the space. So I'm not going to move into a tiny house or anything at this point, but I thought it was interesting to see and just to kind of question the basic thing about, like, as you get more successful, you should buy a bigger house. Thinking about those kind of things is interesting to me.
Agreed. And I think, you know, I think what they were all shooting for was, you know, a way to be happy, and a lot of them were saying that minimalist lifestyle. You know, they basically, none of them had financial worries. You know, they all said they essentially own the tiny houses flat out, which makes sense, and obviously then they had more money for other things to do in their life, so things they enjoyed. They weren't working to pay for the home and live in the home. So there's a lot to be said about all that. You know, did they take it way too far? Yeah, but you know, like the other thing that nobody, like, again, this is where I was like, I would have liked this documentary a lot more if they would have shown both sides of the coin. Like, you know, it wasn't like, you know, I'm sure tiny house life isn't, like, you know, perfect. Obviously, like, there's some big issues. Like, there's no running water in those houses. I mean, it's built on a trailer. Trailers don't hook into a plumbing system. They don't go off city water. I mean, there's nothing there. So, I mean, somehow they're, like, I don't know, have jugs of water or filtration systems off rain or whatever. There's got to be some off-grid way they get their water, which I would like to know anyway, but they never covered that in the film. You know, and then again, obviously, like, the other big issue that you know is that whole, you can't socialize in a house like that. You know what I mean? And most of them lived in these, like, they'd show the house and it was like a fenced-in, super ultra tiny lot. You know, with the exception of the, you know, of Christopher, the main character, if you will, that owned that plot of land out in the middle of nowhere in Colorado, which was cool. But again, you can't live out there on your tiny house or maybe you can. But I just want to know, like, how did he do it? Where did he get his water?
Yeah, and I'm also curious about, like, his financial thing, because he was, like, always like, oh man, they cut my hours at work or whatever. Like, he clearly had some, like, hourly job where like, I'm curious how he's gonna do that out there in the middle of nowhere. Like, where's his money gonna come from?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's a good question, but I mean, assuming he paid for the tiny house as he went along, which I think he did. I get the impression that he did. But on top of that, I mean, if he owns the land flat out, which I'm guessing he does, because, like, there's a lot of places way up in the mountains where you can buy, you know, 10, 15 acres for whatever, 5 or 10 grand. Where if you're in the area he was at, when you're out in the middle of nowhere. Anyhow, and so assuming he owns his house, there's obviously no utilities. He owns the land. Taxes on a piece of land like that are going to be $100 a year or something. So I mean, theoretically, he needs to be able to find some food. I mean, he could live for virtually nothing out there.
It's true.
maybe come back once a year. Well, except for the fact that he'll die in the winter because he has no water. Well, I guess. But other than that, it's a great plan.
Oh man. That should be the review that they put on the box. Like, great plan, except you'll die in the
I'm just saying.
So I feel like I've come off a little negative, but actually, I did like this documentary. I wouldn't say I loved it by any means, but I think it's a 3-star documentary for me. It's probably the lowest of the ones we watched thus far, but I was interested in it, and one good thing about it too is, and this is going to sound condescending, but one good thing about it was that it was short, and that kind of fit with the. And I don't mean that like it sounds, but it kind of fit with the whole theme of the tiny houses. You know, they were compact about the whole thing, and unlike Hero Dreams of Sushi or whatever that we watched, Jiro Dreams of Sushi, where they just kept it going for 2 hours. They knew when to get out on this one, and I'm gonna give them props for that.
Yeah, I'll give them props. And again, I'm right out there with you. 3 stars. It was totally worth watching, especially because it's such a quick little view, and it certainly kept your interest for 1 hour.
Yeah.
Although again, my other criticism is they could have gone through and showed the flip side of the coin. I would have liked that, and I would have stuck around for an extra 30 minutes for that, I think. But yeah, still good.
Cool. Any other thoughts on Tiny?
Yeah, I think that about covers it. Let's give you the one quote I did like in the movie, where so he starts building his tiny house, and then he kind of runs out of money, and he kind of stops working on the house altogether. And then he gives one little quote where he's like, there's a point in every project where the excitement of the original project wears off, and you're left with a lot to do. I just thought that was the simplest little quote, but it was so true. That's like there's so many unfinished projects out there in the world, and that just summed it up for everyone. I was just like, really, really simply stated, but yep, very, very true.
That's going to be episode 7 of this podcast. I feel like, oh man, there's an endless number of episodes to do.
Cool. Anything else you had on Tiny?
I don't think so. I talked to I had a conversation. My wife watched it with me, and I had a conversation with her about would you ever live in a tiny house? 'Cause I was a little romanticized by it at the end of the documentary. She was like, no. So I was like, all right, that's fair enough. All right, talk me out of it.
Yeah, that's funny because obviously right now I was like, oh no, that's ridiculous. But if you would have presented me with the exact same thing when I was 20 to probably 23 years old, I bet you anything I'd be living in a tiny house up in the mountains somewhere. I would have been all over that. But once you have friends and family and you're like, oh yeah, it's really nice coming into my nice warm house and enjoying it. I'm a big I'm a big believer in real estate. I think it's something that is part of your life every single day. So I think if you're going to spend your money somewhere or go a little excess in one area, that's the one area. Plus, it's an investment. It's one of the very few objects you can own that actually increases in value over time. So I'm a big proponent for real estate. Anyway.
Cool. Good. Yeah. So since this was so short, we watched an additional short film. Do we want to talk about that quick here?
We did a little bonus documentary, if you will, this week. You wanna give us a lead-in because I don't have all the information on who put it out.
Yeah, I'll talk about it. So ESPN and Bill Simmons, who I listened to Bill Simmons' podcast. I've listened to his podcast for a long time. He's a little hero of mine because he started out as just a blogger who blogged about sports, and he has since become like one of the most popular sports writers in the world. But he works for ESPN, and they started this 30 for 30 documentary series, which You may have seen some of them on Netflix and stuff like that. But they started doing these shorts, and these shorts are really cool. And thought maybe every once in a while, when we have a shorter documentary, we could pepper one of these in here, and they generally get fairly well-known or accomplished directors to come in and direct a sports movie. And in this one, we have The Legend of the High Five. So the origin of the high five. So I would ask you, Jonathan, because I just sent you the link. You didn't know what it was going in. How'd you feel when you realized it was about the legend of the high five?
It's amazing. I gotta say, by the way, this is a great time to throw on because we're focusing on Tiny. This is a tiny documentary we're talking about here, 10 minutes, but it is a compact 10 minutes, and everything in it is good. It wasn't until this moment when Tyler just sent me this link today that's like a little documentary essentially about the origin of the high five and the gentleman that started it, that I just assumed that, gladiators finished up in the arena, 3,000 years ago, and the last two standing gave each other a high five. I just assumed it was a part of people since the beginning of time. But no, it's what was this, in like 1960s or something? No, not even in the 60s. Would have been in the late 70s.
Yeah, I think it was 1980. Like was the year, I believe. We should preface this a little bit by saying this is somewhat debated. Like there are some who claim that the high five started prior to this, but the story presented in this documentary is that it was the 1980 Dodgers, and basically one of the Dodgers was trying to get a home run record kind of thing. There's three Dodgers who were all trying to get. Four Dodgers, I think, who if they all broke 30 home runs, they would set the record for the first team to ever get four players with 30 home runs. And finally, the last game, he hit his home run, and he ran around the bases, and his team met him at home plate, and just unprepared, nothing. They just put up their hands and slapped them together, and the high five was born.
The high five was born. Then and there. But yeah, which was kind of mind blowing, like that, and they kind of talked about it, and like that's where high five started, and it was after that they caught on and obviously became a part of everyday life from that point forward. And then and the documentary is cool too, because then right after that it kind of goes into the history of. Again, I just saw this tonight, and actually I was doing like a million things tonight, so I literally had the video playing on my phone in my car. So I was driving, and I didn't actually get to watch the video. I just was listening to it while I was driving. So I can't remember his name because I was just doing too many things at once. But the Dodger that started it kind of goes into the story of him after that, which was kind of an interesting story too. Again, there's so much packed into that 10 minutes that afterwards, like a year or two later, at first they're like, yeah, there's no real reason that he got traded. He gets traded over to Los Angeles, I think, and it was basically, and then they could say, yeah, it was because he was gay. He was one of the first, like, more or less known or openly gay, baseball players. And this 1980s, yeah. So, still a lot of homophobia going on, certainly among professional athletes, and it kind of goes through his little story of what happened to him after that, and I don't know, just a ton of information for 10 minutes. Plus, you get to find out about the origin of the high five. So,
yeah, this is pretty great.
Anybody who's got 10 minutes to kill?
For sure. It was interesting to me because it talked about his legacy, and he's no longer with us, and how he created the high five. And the one awesome quote from the documentary is he said in an interview that, like, that feeling you get when you just so excited and you give someone a high five. I was the first person to ever have that feeling. That was a great quote. So
indeed.
So again, we normally focus on documentaries that are on Netflix, but you can, if you just Google 3430 high five, you can watch that quick 10-minute documentary. And yeah, I love all the 30 for 30s. It was for ESPN's 30th anniversary. They did 30 documentaries by great directors. So maybe we'll touch on another one down the line. We'll see. See what happens.
Cool. Yeah. I know of at least one really good 30 for 30 documentary that I've seen, so maybe we'll throw that out there someday.
Good deal. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to
Cool.
discuss next week.
All right. So for those of you who are new to the show, at the end of every episode, one of us throws out 3 documentaries, and the other person picks it, and that's what we review for the next week. It's my week to lay out the documentaries, PT's week to pick. So here you go. And I took up a theme for this week, and my theme is causes. We are taking up a cause next week.
Okay.
We've got 3 to choose from, all of which have been the focus of many documentaries, but I've got one from 3 different genres of causes. First documentary, Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. It is a documentary, if you don't know about it, that is about basically a guy's fight against the Americanized diet, if you will, even though he's Australia, and his attempts to go up against it by juicing for, I believe, 90 days. And not juicing like steroids, juicing like grinding vegetables into a puree and drinking them. Second cause, going on the economic side of things, a documentary called Inequality for All, which basically focuses on the economic gap that we face here in America and really around the world, but done by a one of Clinton's economic advisors is actually a pretty smart guy, and anyhow, that's kind of covers the equality gap. And the third one is entitled Cool It, which is about environmental change, and it's a book written by a Dutch guy who actually wrote, or a film done by a Dutch guy who wrote The Skeptical Environmentalist, which was kind of a radical environmental book. At the time, and still really is, it causes a lot of controversy, and he's a controversial figure in the world of environmental everything. So those are your 3 choices. Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, Inequality for All, and Cool It.
I love it. Good choices. I like this theme. This is
Thank you.
Now I got to think about like what cause do I care about? What cause do I not care about? I can only care about one, really.
That's it. You're basically giving a big middle finger to the other 2.
We'll take this healthy eating and environmentalism because I'm going to go with Inequality for All.
Okay.
I have not seen it. Know nothing about it. Be interested, though, to check it out.
Sweet.
So, join us next week. We will be discussing Inequality for All. Is it available on Netflix? What?
It is. All 3 films I made sure today are still available on Netflix. So if you want to watch all 3 in preparation for next week so you can see if Tyler made the best choice or not, you can.
And if you want to say I'm an idiot for picking the wrong one, you can email us at feedback@documentaryreviewpodcast.com. Subject line, PT's an idiot. That would be great.
You can also tweet it at hashtag PT's an idiot.
That'd be great if we got that hashtag going. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. That'll do it for us. This is PT. Keep it real.
And this is Jonathan. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.